The morning smelled freshly of damp earth and pine. The sun rose lazily through the tall trees of the Willow Creek forest as Samuel adjusted the straw hat on his head. At 78, the old man bore the marks of a life lived with intensity on his face, but his eyes still shone with the curiosity of a child. Next to him, Max, a sturdy German shepherd with a visible scar on his right paw, walked with firm steps. Despite being retired from his job as a police dog, Max remained vigilant, constantly sniffing the air as if each walk was a new mission. "Come on, Max, one more time on the trail," Samuel said, stroking the dog's head. Max responded with a slight bark, as if in agreement. The trail was a familiar place, but Samuel never tired of it. The sounds of the nearby stream, the birdsong, the occasional creak of a tree in the wind, it was his little refuge. That morning, however, the tranquility seemed charged with something Samuel couldn't explain. Suddenly, Max stopped. His ears perked up and his muscular body tensed. He began to sniff the ground intensely, following a trail invisible to Samuel. "What is it, boy?" Samuel asked, leaning over slightly to look at what Max was so interested in. Max ignored the question and took a few steps towards a bend in the trail, growling low. The sound was almost imperceptible, but enough to put Samuel on alert. "Don't tell me you found another squirrel. It's not enough that time you nearly knocked my hat off." Despite the light tone, Samuel felt a shiver run up his spine. Following Max, he spotted something peculiar among the vegetation. A dark, irregular object was half buried in the mud, partially covered by fallen leaves. Samuel frowned. "Hold on, Max." He knelt down carefully, his knees cracking in protest, and began to clean the object with his hands. It was an old, worn backpack with the zipper partially open and a torn strap. Max sniffed the bag intensely, then barked in a tone that Samuel recognized. Alert. "What's that? Who would leave a backpack here?" Samuel muttered, pulling the backpack out of the mud. The weight of the backpack indicated that it wasn't empty. Samuel looked around, but the forest seemed as peaceful as ever. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. "Calm down, kid. Maybe someone just missed it by accident." He tried to reassure himself, but Max's barking and the dog's intense gaze said something else. Samuel grabbed his backpack and stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Let's go home," he started to say, but Max pulled his collar forward, still sniffing the trail that seemed to continue beyond the path. It was the beginning of something that Samuel felt, deep down, would change that ordinary morning. The old man looked at the forest in front of him and then at Max, who seemed determined not to let it go. "Ah, Max, you and your stubbornness. All right, kid, let's see where this goes," he said resignedly, holding on tightly to the leash as Max advanced. The backpack, heavy in his hands, seemed to contain more than just objects. It carried the harbinger of a mystery that Samuel and Max were about to unravel. Samuel wasn't one to give in to curiosity easily, but there was something about that backpack that bothered him. With Max tugging on his collar, he decided to pause and check what was inside before going any further. "Easy there, kid. Let's see what's got you so worked up," Samuel muttered as he sat down on a rock by the side of the trail. Mud had covered much of his backpack, and he had to rub the zipper with his hands to get it open. As soon as he pulled it open, a strange smell emerged, something between mold and accumulated dirt. He carefully opened the main part and began to examine the items. There was a worn map with pencil marks at specific points, some of which seemed to correspond to the area around the forest. Near the bottom, he found a wad of damp money notes, wrapped in plastic, and a flashlight that looked broken. What caught his eye most, however, was a black-bound notebook, the spine of which was almost loose. "Well, that was interesting," Samuel said, turning the pages of the notebook. The notes were hasty scribbles, with disconnected words and lists of numbers that made no sense at first glance. Max sniffed the notebook and then lifted his head sharply. Looking at the forest, he started growling low. a sound that made Samuel's heart race. "What now, Max?" he asked, trying to follow the dog's gaze, but all he saw were trees and bushes swaying in the wind. Max didn't wait for any more orders. He pulled hard on the leash and began to follow an invisible trail, forcing Samuel to stand up hastily, still holding his backpack. All right, easy, Max," he grumbled, stumbling over branches scattered on the ground. Max led Samuel to a more secluded area of the forest, where the vegetation was denser. There, he stopped abruptly, focusing on something on the ground. Samuel approached, breathing hard, and saw fresh footprints in the damp earth. The marks indicated that someone had passed that way recently. They were large, probably those of a grown man, and seemed to move erratically, as if the person was running or carrying something heavy. "This is getting weird, Max," Samuel whispered, crouching down to take a closer look. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the footprints were going in the opposite direction to where he was going. Max continued sniffing around, stopping at a bush where the smell seemed strongest. He growled again, and Samuel began to feel uncomfortable. Who would have left all this here? And why? He muttered to himself, looking at the backpack and then at the footprints. Suddenly, a crack echoed in the forest, like the sound of a branch breaking in the distance. Samuel froze. Max, for his part, raised his ears and stood in front of his owner in a defensive posture. "Who's there?" Samuel shouted, trying to sound firm, but his voice came out shaky. Only silence answered. However, Samuel knew that he and Max were no longer alone. The forest, so peaceful minutes before, now seemed like a hostile place. The sound of the wind between the trees was drowned out by Samuel's rapid breathing, while Max remained motionless, his eyes fixed on a point ahead. Another crack echoed, closer this time. Samuel clutched his backpack to his chest, feeling the weight of the mystery he was carrying. "Max," he whispered, leaning slightly towards the dog. "What do you see, boy?" Max replied with a low growl, the hairs on his neck bristling. He took a step forward, protecting Samuel as if he knew something or someone was lurking. Samuel swallowed and turned slowly, trying to find the source of the sound. Everything seemed quiet, but this stillness was heavy, almost threatening. "If there's someone there, you'd better come out," he shouted, this time more forcefully, but still without an answer. Max began to walk slowly, sniffing the ground with the precision of an experienced tracker. Samuel followed, each step creaking under the dry leaves and broken branches. He felt like the whole forest was watching. Suddenly, a sound came from the opposite direction, a rapid rustling, like someone moving between the bushes. Samuel turned his body, almost stumbling, but he couldn't see anything beyond the shadows of the trees. "Max, I think we're being followed," he said, his voice low. The dog glanced at Samuel, as if to confirm his suspicion, and cautiously moved forward again. As they got deeper into the woods, the trails seemed to disappear, swallowed up by the dense vegetation. Samuel felt a chill as he realized that he was much further than he usually went. It felt more and more like they were heading towards danger, but turning back seemed impossible without answers. As they followed, Max suddenly stopped and started barking loudly, looking up at a tree. Samuel tried to see what was there, but all he could see was a dark figure moving quickly between the branches. "What the hell was that?" Samuel exclaimed, taking a few steps back while holding Max's collar tightly. Max's bark echoed through the forest, breaking the silence in an almost deafening way. In response, the sound of hurried footsteps became audible, as if someone was fleeing in the opposite direction. "Wait, who's there?" shouted Samuel again, but the only response was the sound diminishing until it disappeared. He crouched down next to Max, trying to calm him as he looked around. The air seemed colder, and Samuel began to question his own courage. "What have we gotten ourselves into? Eh, kid?" he said, more to himself than to Max. Max finally stopped barking, but remained alert, his eyes scanning his surroundings. Samuel knew he had to make a decision. Keep following the trail or go back. The map, the money, the notebook, and now the mysterious presence. Everything indicated that there was more there than he could ever have imagined. With a heavy sigh, he took a firm hold of Max's collar and took the next step, determined to find out what was hidden in that forest. Danger seemed near, but Samuel wasn't willing to go home without understanding what was going on. As Samuel and Max advanced through the dense woods, the tension seemed to tighten like a knot in their chests. The footprints they had found earlier became more confused, crossing in different directions, as if the person who had made them was trying to throw off whoever was following them. Max sniffed intensely, and each bark or growl brought him to a new point of interest. "You're pushy, Max. I hope you're right," Samuel muttered, holding his backpack in one hand and his collar in the other. Suddenly, Max stopped in front of a dense bush, his low growl echoing like a warning. Samuel carefully moved the branches aside and held his breath when he saw what was hidden there. A small makeshift hideout. Inside the shelter, made of pieces of tarpaulin and thick leaves, there were scraps of food, crumpled clothes, and a few scattered items. An almost empty water bottle and a dirty blanket completed the scene. Samuel slowly knelt down to examine the place, while Max sniffed around, on the lookout for any sound. "It looks like someone is living here, or hiding," Samuel said quietly. He picked up a piece of cloth and noticed a stain of dried blood. Next to it, a crumpled magazine had a headline that made his heart race. "Dangerous fugitive escapes from state prison." The photo of the man stared at him with a cold, calculating expression. "Max, I think we've just stepped into something very serious," Samuel whispered, looking around as if he expected the man in the photo to appear at any moment. The German shepherd growled again, this time with more intensity. Max sniffed the ground around the hiding place and started to pull Samuel in again. Reluctantly, he followed the dog, but the feeling of being watched made him look over his shoulder at every step. They hadn't walked far before Max stopped again, now in front of a narrow clearing. The footprints were clearer there, as if someone had run through the mud. Samuel bent down to inspect them better, but the sound of a branch breaking behind them made him freeze. He stood up quickly and turned around, his heart beating so loudly that he could barely hear Max growl. At first, he saw nothing but the still trees, but instinct told him that they were not alone. "Who's there?" Samuel shouted, trying to sound confident, but the trembling in his voice was evident. Suddenly, a shadow passed quickly between the trees, almost imperceptibly. Max remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the movement. "Max, I think we found the owner of that backpack, and he doesn't seem happy to see us," Samuel whispered, holding the collar tighter. The old man knew that the fugitive was still around. Now, with confirmation of who it was, the situation was even more dangerous. He felt sweat trickle down his forehead as his brain tried to decide what to do next. "We've got to get out of here, kid. Let's get back before he decides to introduce himself." But Max didn't move. The dog seemed prepared to face any threat. Samuel looked again at the makeshift hiding place, and then at the surrounding trees. The danger was too close, and he knew that every decision now could mean the difference between going home or not. Samuel took a step back, tugging on Max's collar in an attempt to convince him to back off. The German shepherd resisted, his paws firmly planted on the ground and his gaze fixed on something Samuel couldn't yet see. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed through the forest, the metallic clang of a gun being cocked. Samuel froze. His breath caught in his throat, while his heart beat so hard that he was sure it could be heard in the distance. "Don't move." The voice was hoarse, but carried a cold menace. From between the trees, a man emerged. He was thin but muscular, with a scruffy beard and eyes that shone with the intensity of a predator. In his hand, a pistol pointed directly at Samuel. He recognized the face immediately. It was the fugitive from the headline. "So the curious old man decided to mess with what he shouldn't have," the man sneered, stepping forward. Max growled loudly, his teeth bared, ready to attack at any moment. Samuel held up a hand in a gesture of calm, trying to control the situation. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I was just walking my dog. We can leave and forget we saw anything." His voice trembled, but he tried to sound convincing. The fugitive laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Forget? You've already seen too much." He pointed his gun at the backpack in Samuel's hands. "Leave that on the ground now." Samuel obeyed slowly, carefully placing the backpack on the ground. Max, however, couldn't take his eyes off the man, his muscles tense like a bow ready to fire. "Do you think you'll get out of this?" Samuel asked, trying to distract the fugitive. "The police are probably already looking for you around here." "The police don't know anything," shouted the man, his voice echoing through the forest. He looked around quickly, as if to see if anyone could hear them, and then turned back to face Samuel. "But if you keep talking, maybe they'll have a reason to show up." Before Samuel could reply, Max lunged forward. In one swift movement, the dog lunged at the man, grabbing his arm with his teeth. The fugitive screamed in pain, struggling to get rid of Max as the gun fell to the ground. "Max, look out!" Samuel shouted, backing away instinctively. The struggle between the dog and the fugitive was fierce. Max wouldn't let go of the man's arm, who kicked and tried to push him away with his other hand. Taking advantage of the distraction, Samuel grabbed his backpack and started running, his old feet thudding heavily on the forest floor. Behind him, the sound of fighting continued. He knew he needed to find somewhere safe, but where? Then he remembered the abandoned watchtower, located a few hundred meters away. It was an old fire station that he occasionally visited on his walks. "Come on, Samuel, you can do it," he muttered to himself as he forced his legs to move faster. Finally, he spotted the weathered wooden structure, partially overgrown with ivy. With Max still struggling in the distance, Samuel climbed the tower steps as fast as he could, feeling every muscle protest. From his new vantage point, he looked down and saw Max still facing the fugitive. Despite everything, the dog was gaining ground. But Samuel knew that the man could recover at any moment. With no time to lose, he pulled out the emergency flare he always carried on his walks and held it up with trembling hands. "Max, hang in there, kid. Help is coming," he said, as he prepared to fire the flare, hoping that the police would be close enough to notice his call for help. Samuel fired the flare. The bright trail rose in an arc until it exploded in a bright red flash against the forest sky. The pop echoed throughout the area, a muted cry for help that he could only hope would be heard. From his vantage point on the watchtower, he saw Max and the fugitive still fighting. Max, even in retirement, displayed the ferocity of a trained police dog. He had taken the man down, but the fugitive was struggling to get free, kicking and screaming in desperation. Samuel shouted, "Max, keep him busy, boy! Help is on the way!" Downstairs, the fugitive managed to reach a piece of wood and use it to hit Max in the flank. The German shepherd let out a yelp of pain, but didn't flinch. He advanced again, blocking any attempt by the man to get up. Samuel, watching from above, felt a mixture of pride and dread. He knew that Max was fighting with all his might, but how long could he hold out? Then the distant sound of sirens cut through the air. Samuel's heart raced with new hope. He started waving his arms and shouting, trying to attract the attention of the police. "Over here! Up here!" he shouted, his voice hoarse from exertion. The sirens were fast approaching, and Samuel saw the first rays of light from the lanterns cutting through the darkness between the trees. A team of policemen appeared in the clearing, weapons in hand, moving with precision towards the fight. "Freeze! Drop whatever you're holding and get down on the ground!" shouted one of the policemen, his voice amplified by a megaphone. The fugitive, seeing that he was cornered, tried to get up and run, but Max jumped again, pinning him to the ground. Max's strength and the approach of the policeman made him give up. He raised his hands, muddy and with cuts on his arms, as the officers approached to handcuff him. "Fucking dog," muttered the fugitive, spitting on the ground as he was immobilized. Samuel slowly descended from the tower, each step seeming higher than the last. When he finally reached the ground, one of the policemen came up to him. "We received the beacon and rushed over here," said the officer, examining Samuel from top to bottom. I'm fine, thanks to Max," replied Samuel, pointing at the dog. Max, exhausted but still standing, walked slowly over to Samuel. His flank was injured, but he was wagging his tail with determination. Samuel bent down and wrapped his arms around Max's neck in a tight hug. "You're amazing, kid. You saved our lives," Samuel whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. The police began to search the fugitive and the scene. They found the backpack with the money, the notebook, and the map that Samuel had been carrying. One of the officers confirmed it. "That's him, the state prison escapee? Well done, sir. Your courage and the help of your dog made all the difference." Another officer approached Max, kneeling down to stroke him. "This one's a real hero," he said, smiling as Max licked his hand. Samuel, still holding the dog, felt a mixture of relief and pride. The forest that had seemed so threatening minutes ago was now full of voices, lights, and a sense of security. The fugitive was taken away in a car, while Samuel and Max were accompanied by a policeman to receive care and rest. It had been a long night, but the nightmare was finally over. "Let's go home, kid. You deserve a feast," Samuel said, cuddling Max as they walked towards the trail illuminated by the police lanterns. The forest, now quiet, seemed almost grateful for the outcome. The next morning, the sun shone softly over Willow Creek, and Samuel sat on his porch, watching Max rest at his feet. The German shepherd was still tired from the night before, but his spirit seemed unshaken. He kept his eyes on the movement of the trees, as if ready to protect his master again at any moment. Samuel smiled as he stroked his faithful companion's head. "You've done a lot already, kid. That bastard could have finished us off. But you've proved that even in retirement, you're still the best police dog there ever was." Max looked at him and wagged his tail, as if he understood the words. That morning, the story of Samuel and Max had already spread through the small town. A few hours later, a police car pulled up in front of the house. The officer who got out was the same one who had helped the night before, carrying a small bag in his hands. "Good morning, Mr. Samuel. How's the hero?" asked the policeman, gesturing to Max. "Resting, but he deserves it. Come on, sit down," Samuel replied, pointing to a chair beside him. The policeman sat down and took a shiny medallion with a blue ribbon out of his bag. He handed it to Samuel. "This is for Max, official recognition for the service he gave yesterday. Few dogs would do what he did, even more so after he retired." Samuel took the medallion, touched, and placed it around Max's neck. The German shepherd didn't seem to understand what it meant, but wagged his tail energetically while Samuel laughed. "Well, you're officially a hero now, Max," said Samuel, proudly. After the policeman said goodbye, Samuel stayed on the balcony for hours, watching Max and thinking about what had happened. The forest, which had always been a place of peace, now had a new layer of meaning for him. This experience had challenged him, and also reminded him of how valuable his connection with Max was. A few days later, Samuel decided that his walks through the forest would continue, but with more caution. He researched safer routes, monitored areas, and even acquired a new emergency radio. "You're still going to walk with me, Max, but this time, no scares, right?" he joked, as Max wagged his tail, excited by the idea. On their first walk after the incident, Samuel noticed something different. The forest seemed more alive, more welcoming. He realized that, despite the danger, this place was still his refuge, a space where he and Max could explore, reflect, and renew themselves. "It seems that, in a way, all this has made us stronger, kid," said Samuel, looking at Max, who was sniffing the surrounding trees. The forest was still the same, but for Samuel and Max, it had become a place where bonds were solidified and unforgettable memories were created. As they walked together, side by side, the shadow of danger seemed to have finally disappeared, giving way to a renewed sense of belonging and courage.